Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you for returning. This morning, going to have a conversation with returning guest, Dr. Doug Manion, CEO of Kleo Pharmaceuticals. He's joining us on the program again to give us an insight into his personal journey from working as an engineer in Africa to going to med school, then moving into drug development. Welcome back, Dr. Doug Manion. How have you been?
I've been great. Thanks, Neil. It's great to be back again.
Well, when we were talking before, we talked about your company, Kleo Pharmaceuticals. You joined them just a couple of years ago in 2017, and we talked a little bit about some of the R&D that you're doing there concerning immuno-oncology. Today, I'd like to give our listeners an insight into, why you do what it is that you do, Doug.
Thanks. I'm a Canadian. Actually grew up in Ottawa, Canada, which is the capital of Canada, and actually did most of my studies in French. My mother's French-Canadian. Mm-hmm. And the school I went to was a little bit of a factory for future med students. So about half of my high school class were sons and daughters of doctors that were kind of fated to become doctors themselves. And I gotta tell you, I was kind of turned off the whole idea that someone would know that young in life what they wanted to do, because I knew I had no idea. Mm-hmm. Except I think I didn't want to follow in their footsteps. So I actually was really good at math and physics, and so I actually decided to go into engineering. And once in engineering school, I fell under the mentorship of a really, really cool doctor by the name of Ron Drosty. And Ron Drosty was a water supply and sanitation engineer, and his mission in life was try to bring clean water and plumbing, basically, to poor areas of the world. Mm-hmm. And so with his help, I actually was able to do a lot of work study projects for Africa. I never actually worked in Africa, but I worked for Africa designing sewers for rural communities in South Africa. And this was in 1979, 80, 81, when, unfortunately, what turned out to be the HIV epidemic was rearing its ugly head in sub-Saharan Africa, and a lot of people were dying from a very, very strange disease where they had all of these terrible infections. And so learning about this through conferences having to do with water supply and sanitation, I decided that maybe I should consider going to medical school with the intent of actually becoming a tropical disease doctor, thinking this was going to be a tropical disease. Of course, by the 82, 83, reports of this being a global viral pandemic had come out. It was clear the U.S. was being severely affected by this outbreak, and so I pivoted from wanting to be a tropical disease doctor to wanting to be an HIV/AIDS doctor. So literally started med school in 83 with the intent of doing that. 4 years of med school, 3 years of internal medicine training, 2 years of clinical infectious diseases training. I came out ready to treat patients, but I wanted to do more. And I was lucky enough to win a scholarship to go anywhere in the world for a postdoctoral year of study, and I actually had a friend who had just come back from doing something, a similar thing at Mass General Hospital in Boston as part of the Harvard system. And so, in fact, he connected me with this incredibly great researcher in HIV by the name of Martin Hirsch, and I asked Martin if I could go work for him for a year, and he said yes. So moved to Boston, and my life just completely changed, because although the environment I was in Ottawa, Canada was good. Obviously, Harvard and Mass General Hospital is kind of mecca in terms of the smartest people looking at a variety of different diseases, yes, especially strong in terms of HIV/AIDS. And so I decided I was going to spend as much time as I could there. So I ended up spending 5 years studying under Martin and another gentleman by the name of Bruce Walker, who was an expert in the body's immune reaction to HIV. So I learned a lot about the immune system. I also learned a lot about the virus. And so I also, by the way, was taught at Harvard Med School, which was great. So I was in charge of the undergraduate curriculum in virology. I really loved that aspect of being in Boston as well. But at the end of my stint, I was looking for academic positions around the world, and Marty Hirsch suggested that I explore pivoting and going into the pharmaceutical industry. And he thought that because of my engineering training, because I'm a very linear thinker, I'm a bit of a systems thinker, that in fact my talents might better be served in the pharmaceutical industry. So upon his recommendation, I actually went to visit a colleague of his that worked in pharma, and I was oriented to all the things that one could do if you joined the pharmaceutical industry. And his steer was really right for me. My goal going into med school initially was to have as big an impact as I could on HIV/AIDS. And I realized pretty quickly that seeing patients individually was impactful, but it's relatively low scale. And that through the pharmaceutical industry, if I could develop drugs that had mass usage, that I could actually impact many more people. And in fact, that turned out to be the case. So joined the industry in 1997, working on a really good drug called Sustiva at a really interesting company called DuPont Pharmaceuticals. And Sustiva ended up becoming one of the most important drugs ever in HIV. And because it was a once-a-day drug, it was actually the kind of cornerstone of eventual multi-drug once-a-day therapy. I'm very proud that I had some contributions in terms of helping to control HIV.
You mentioned in your childhood that you were kind of wanting to do the opposite, go the opposite way of where basically you were placed. No matter what you do, you're into helping people on a mass scale.
It's kind of been my MO, yes. I will say too, though, when I was seeing patients in the late 80s and 90s, HIV positive patients, it was pretty dire. So I would spend a huge amount of time with each patient, but sadly, basically all of them died, and all of them died really sad, tough diseases, and most of them died under kind of difficult social, emotional circumstances because, as you were aware in those times, there was a lot of stigma that came with the diagnosis. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the disease, and it was very, very demanding. I loved it. I felt that I was really providing a tremendous service to these individuals, but I went to an awful lot of funerals, and I didn't think that continuing to do what I was doing was going to actually help to turn the tide. That's the reason why I made a very big change and went into the industry to try to create a solution to this problem, because as things stood pre-1996-97, there was really little hope for these unfortunate individuals who contracted the disease. And now, if you're newly diagnosed with HIV and you have a competent physician and you follow that physician's advice, you should actually live a normal lifespan. And in fact, you could live with HIV and live as normally as someone who doesn't have HIV. Obviously, you have to take your pills every day, and there's regular testing that needs to occur, and we're learning some things about the long-term consequences of having HIV, even if it's well controlled with drugs. But at least now it's significantly better controlled. One of my best friends who has HIV actually just turned 61 a few months ago, and he didn't think he was going to see 40. And so it was great to go to his birthday party because he got 20 more years than he had thought he would, because he was lucky enough to get into drug trials sponsored by the industry in the mid-1990s that tested drugs like mine that he became privy to, and that actually kept him alive.
Do you see a vaccine on the horizon or an overall cure? And I know it's a kind of a double-edged question. Do you see a time when the same drugs, the same compounds can be used for certain types of cancer and HIV at the same time with great results?
So absolutely. A vaccine for HIV has been very, very difficult to find, and it's a complicated virus, and the immune response to it is complicated as well. Although it never ceased to amaze me what science can eventually do. So I hold out tremendous hope that that'll be achievable. We're learning more about the interactions between the immune system and both viruses and cancers on a daily basis. And as you know, the company I work for now is all about redirecting the immune system against tumor cells, and we and others have been able to be very successful at doing that. The technology we use could be equally easily applied to infectious diseases like HIV. Your question as to whether or not HIV and cancers can be cured, the answer is also yes, but each is unique. Each cancer and HIV are kind of unique in terms of their biology, and so each of them will need unique solutions. In the case of HIV, the challenge is to actually awaken latent virus that is stored in various cells in the body that are difficult for the immune system to see. And so the approach that's being taken is a kick and kill approach, where you first try to wake up the virus in these latent where it's latent, and then have the immune system come in to destroy the virus. And I believe it is feasible, although we're not there yet. Same is true in cancer, although in cancer it's a little bit different. You don't necessarily have to do the kick. Oftentimes, all you need to do is do the kill, which is what my company is doing for myeloma, for prostate cancer, and soon for other cancers as well. And we're very, very hopeful that, in fact, all cancer should ultimately be curable.
Give us a website where our listeners can go and get some more information about Kleo Pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, please go to www.kleopharmaceuticals.com. That's Kleo, Kleo.
Doug, always a pleasure to talk with you, and maybe we'll have more conversations and talk about Kleo and the developments that are going on there at the company, okay?
It's always my pleasure, Neil. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Transcripts and audio of this conversation with Dr. Doug Manion are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, listen in, download it, SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com, Health Professional Radio.